name is Amelia Maria de la Luz Montes, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles, in California, and then I moved to Nebraska in 2000 to write and teach at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So I've been here almost 10 years, almost. I hold a doctorate in American literature from the University of Denver, Colorado, and my other degrees are from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Yes, when I arrived here, the geographic characteristics of Nebraska and the plains, especially the idea of the Great Plains, reminded me of the grasslands of the Sonoran Desert in Mexico. The San Pedro River flows out from the western Sierra Madre mountains through lowland grassland prairies, and they look very much like the prairies here. There are more than 400 species of migratory birds over there, and many of the birds that winter there, one of which is the sandhill crane, then migrates here from there and other areas of Texas. And so what I find interesting is that connection. Recognizing regions in Mexico and North America, specifically Nebraska, as connected ecosystems, to me, are a wonderful moment, and I have recently started writing about this. Also, the long history of Mexican labor, hard labor in Nebraska, has been important to my academic and creative writing. I've been working on a book regarding Latinas in Nebraska and the Midwest, and my fiction has recently been focused on the meatpacking plant in Nebraska as well. A number of people have been very significant in my writing life and my career. My older sister, Emma is her name. She was significant in teaching me to read when I was quite young. She had a difficult time in school. She was 6 years older. She is 6 years older than I am. And so when she entered school, she only spoke Spanish. And so then they kept her back. And then when she finally learned English, they realized she was smart. So then they pushed her up 2 grades. And that was really hard for her. And she didn't want me to have that difficulty. So she started teaching me English as soon as possible. By the time I entered 1st grade, I was fully bilingual and well-read. I have to thank her so much for a smooth transition into the school system. Actually, I was ahead of the grade when I entered. My mother was also quite significant in teaching me to read and write in Spanish. And I'm so glad that I had my mother teach me the Spanish and my sister to teach me the English. I feel very lucky. Then I think of Mrs. Brown, the librarian at the public library 3 blocks from our house. I loved going there for story hour. And Mrs. Brown would read to us, and then in front of us we'd have sheets of paper, and after she finished reading a story, she would ask us to draw a picture or characters that we remembered from the story. And so from a very young age, I was already making connections from one genre to the next, listening to narratives and then thinking about them as art pieces or critically looking at them. That was very meaningful to me. I think reading other writers, there are a number of writers who have influenced me, who keep me thinking in different ways. For instance, a number of writers like Gloria Anzaldúa, who's a Chicana writer from Texas. She's been very influential in my thinking and writing. As far as Mexican writers, I'll mention Elena Poniatowska, who her novel La Noche de Tlaloco, which is about the 1968 Tlaloco massacres. During the Olympics, they massacred a number of students. What I like about her writing is how she mixes history and politics with fiction. People and situations. There was a newspaper article in the Lincoln Journal-Star a few years ago about a meat packing worker whose arm was amputated in a machine accident, and he died. The newspaper quoted his wife as saying that the little trailer where they lived had now become a tomb instead of a home. A home becoming a tomb. Stories like that stay with me. I write them down and have a running log of what people say, and then I create story around that, around what they say. I still, after all these years, I still think about that woman and send out my good energies to her. Hope she's doing all right. I also like to collect postcards of people or places for creating character and thinking about geographic spaces. That's very important. I usually write about issues of class, issues of race, social expectations, how individuals or women challenge, resist, how they make conscious or unconscious decisions about their families, their communities, and society. I also very much like bringing in various moments of Mexican history or U.S. history in my work. For example, my fictional memoir, The Diabetes Chronicles, has a number of footnotes or snippets concerning the history of diabetes in Mexico. So all of these affect my writing and are rich for my writing. Yeah. I like switching genres. For instance, in my fictional memoir, I have first person, and then I jump to a mini drama like a play, and then I jump to third person. So I'm playing with a lot of different styles, and I enjoy doing that. Yeah. Sometimes I think my writing is a letter to my family, and then sometimes I open that up to family meaning communities, family meaning society, or family meaning a letter to nationhood, what that means, and to political figures maybe. However, I don't tend to say this is who it's for specifically when I'm writing. Mainly when I'm writing, I'm trying to get at a truth. And so, you know, as far as who I'm writing for is secondary or in the back of my head, but when I really get into my writing, I'm trying to dig deep and reach down and get to the real truth. I say read. Read everything. Read, if you're interested in novels, read novels. If you're interested in a certain genre of novels, for instance, science fiction or detective or, novels that have to do with history, I would definitely then read as much as you can from that area. But I would have a wide range of reading, not just novelists who are American, but novelists who are from other countries, definitely. Reading and writing go hand in hand, and I'm sure you've heard of the saying, you can't be a good writer if you're not a good reader, and I really believe that. Some people are helped by reading books about writing and how to get started as a writer. And I think Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, is called Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing in Life. That's a really good one to start. I really am in tune with the connections among this geographical region with other similar geographical regions concerning Mexico and the Southwest. And this whole area of the grasslands and the plains, I think, is a rich area to tap into concerning, our identity in a more broadened way. Because yes, we are people with an identity. However, there's also outside of us a whole ecosystem that we need to connect with. So I think that's really important. And I just published through Penguin Classics. I edited a 19th century novel by the first Mexican-American novelist in North America, and her name is Maria Amparo Ruiz de Burton. And what I see with her works is a direct connection with where we are concerning immigration issues, concerning who we are as Americans. And it's very important to reread her after over 100 years to see where we are concerning these topics. And I think by reading Ruiz de Burton, I think she enlightens us to see either how we have not grown as much or that we have the potential to grow even more. I'm going to be reading from two publications. One is more creative, and the other is more academic. And I chose to do this to reflect my Latina heritage as a scholar and creative writer. For instance, Mexican writers such as Elena Poniatowska, Rosa Maria Rofiel, Rosario Castellanos, and then Chicana writers, Gloria Anzaldúa, Graciela Limón, and Ana Castillo. They're all scholars as well as creative writers. They do not see their scholarly work as separate from their fiction, nonfiction, or poetry, but as a seamless canvas of writing. So this has always been the case in Latin America. So I will be reading from the piece Queen for a Day from the collection Angle of Vision, which is coming out from University of Michigan Press in December. And this piece, sections of it are in my memoir. And then I'm going to be reading from the 19th century novel I just talked about that I edited by Maria Amparo Ruiz de Burton. And so there'll be connections there between issues that I talked about.
Good afternoon. My name is Meredith McGowan. I am the curator of the Heritage Room, and I'd like to welcome you to the Heritage Room and to the John H. Ames Reading Series, which has now been around for 25 years. And in fact, this is the 184th reading in this series. So I'm glad you're here to enjoy it today. We are here in the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. It is a special collection that is dedicated to promoting and preserving works by and about Nebraska authors. It is obviously a representative collection because we don't have room for everything that we could put in here. There are about 13,000 volumes now and about 3,000 authors who are represented. We also have a number of information files. Obviously, if you look around the room, you'll see pictures on the walls that are related to Nebraska authors, carvings. We have manuscripts, other memorabilia too. And we would invite you to come back to the Heritage Room when we're open. And actually, we're open right now on Sunday afternoons from 2 to 5. But we welcome you to stay after the program. We're also open on Tuesday through Friday from 12 to 3. So that would be another time for you to come in. If you are watching this on 5 City TV, who films the programs, we are located on the 3rd floor of Bennett Martin Library, downtown in Lincoln at 14th and N Street. So we'd welcome a visit from you anytime that we're open. We'd also like to thank the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. We're able to bring special programs like this because of an endowment established through their volunteer efforts a number of years ago. Our reader today is Amelia Maria de la Luz Montes. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, and she holds an MA and also a PhD from, I skipped over, I'm sorry, she has a BA from Loyola Marymount University with a double major in English and Spanish, and then she has an MA and a PhD from the University of Denver in American Literature and Creative Writing. She's been a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for the past 10 years or so and has been honored in a number of ways in those years. For example, in 2005, she received the College of Arts and Sciences Distinguished Teaching Award. She writes critical literary theory, fiction, nonfiction, and criticism. Most recently, she's edited a 19th century text, Who Would Have Thought It, by Maria Amparo Ruiz de Burton. as well as written the introduction and the notes and translated letters. We're happy to have Amelia here with us today. If you could please help me welcome her, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, to Meredith McGowan, the curator for the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors, to Lincoln City Libraries and the many people committed to bringing books and music to our community, especially our young people. Thanks to Pat Leach, Greg Michaels, Barbara Hansen, Vicki Wood, Carolyn Dow, Sheila Jacobs, Susan Connell, Rod Cummings, Peter Jorgensen, and to my students, colleagues, friends, my partner who are here. It's wonderful to see all of you. I will be reading from 2 publications to reflect my Latina heritage as a scholar and creative writer. Mexican writers such as Elena Poniatowska, Rosa Maria Rafael, Rosario Castellanos, Chicana writers Gloria Ansaldúa, Graciela Limón, Ana Castillo, Helena Maria Viramontes are all scholars as well as creative writers. They do not see their scholarly work as separate from their fiction, nonfiction, or poetry, but as a seamless canvas of writing. I will first read the introduction, a part of the introduction from this 19th century novel that Meredith talked to you about, and then I'm going to read a nonfiction piece entitled Queen for a Day from the collection Angle of Vision, which is coming out from the University of Michigan Press in December. I'm choosing these 2 pieces because they connect across the centuries with themes regarding class, social norms, and the negotiations recent immigrants or children of immigrants make to balance both cultures, both languages, and both identities. So first, this book. Why choose this book? First of all, I also want to give a special thanks to Susan Belasco, who's here in the audience, who actually gave me the connection to the editor at Penguin Press, Elda Roeder, to have this book happen. So thank you so much, Susan, for doing that. Who would have thought it arrives on our 21st century bookshelves at a time when we are experiencing parallel events in the history of our nation? Given our renewed interest in Lincoln's presidential legacy, in the Civil War, and in contemporary conflicts abroad, this novel adds new perspectives to these discussions. Ruiz de Burton's 19th century Mexican-American story offers us a unique view into the literary marketplace of that time. Her perspective is of compelling interest to 21st century readers. Who Would Have Thought It is a historical romance that takes us on a journey from California to New England, then to Washington, D.C., through the Capitol Rotunda and halls of the Senate, and on to New York during and immediately following the Civil War. Actual events are the backdrop to the fictional plot. For example, a number of famous battles are interwoven with crucial scenes: the Battle of Bull Run, the Confederate victory at Chancellorsville in Northeast Virginia. Ruiz de Burton places us in the midst of important political moments. We are present during President Lincoln's issuance of his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and we are there when members of Congress take their lunch and their liquor to the first Battle of Bull Run. Ruiz de Burton may have been familiar with H.R. Tracy's poem Civilians at Bull Run, which appeared in the Boston Herald in 1861. The poem's first stanzas are, "Have you heard of the story so lacking in glory about the civilians who went to the fight, with everything handy from sandwich to brandy to fill their broad stomachs and make them all tight? There were bulls from our State Street and cattle from Wall Street, and members of Congress to see the great fun. Newspaper reporters, some regular shorters, on a beautiful Sunday went out to Bull Run." The novel also includes a fictional depiction, yet often it seems true to life, of President Lincoln sitting among a crowd on the White House lawn, listening to music and conversing with the novel's characters. The romantic and the historical are braided together to create a 19th century world that is politically, sexually, and racially lacking in ethics. Ruiz de Burton invites the reader to journey through a very complex system of interpersonal and public exchanges. To do this, she layers important historical moments with popular culture. We learn of the famous soprano Jenny Lind and the opera sisters Adelina and Carlotta Patti. We are there with the Norval girls and Lola in their dressing rooms before they are off to evening events. We listen to their chatter regarding French lace, costly silks, aigrette plume-shaped jewelry, and hairpieces, fashions that are all the rage. There are many literary references which remind us, lest we forget, that the main source of information and entertainment at that time was print culture. For example, Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous work, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was not initially published as a book. It was printed in the National Era newspaper in serial form for 2 years, between 1851 and 1852, before publication in book form. Ruiz de Burton brings us into this print world through her descriptive chapter titles and dialogue. The Beechers, as well as a number of American, British, and European writers, are present here. Washington Irving, Alfred Lord Tennyson, John Milton, Miguel de Cervantes, William Shakespeare, and George Gordon Lord Byron. She pays special tribute to the satirical writers Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, and Victor Hugo. Yet, Ruiz de Burton's satirical depiction of the West, of New England Yankee life, and of Washington politics implicates her as well. She replicates the racist captivity narratives of the 19th century, which depict Indians as savages. Ruiz de Burton's prejudice is especially apparent in regard to Lola's skin and Lola's father's insistence on a pro-Spanish monarchy. By unraveling these intricate ethnic, gender, sexual, and racial relationships to power in Ruiz de Burton's writing, we all confront the very similar contradictions in which we participate today. And this is why it's been so important for me to look at her and study her. Ruiz de Burton's biographical story begins in 1832. She was born to an aristocratic Mexican military family who owned vast tracts of land. In addition to their home in La Paz, the Ruiz family owned a number of ranches farther north: Santiago de Santa Ana Rancho, Rancho Cañón de Santa Ana, El Rincón Rancho, and La Sierra Rancho. All these properties constitute what are now the Southern California areas of Riverside and Orange counties. Her personal letters reveal a lifelong love of literature, particularly Spanish, French, and Mexican authors. She was educated in law and later used this knowledge in preparation to litigate in court when her land ownership was called into question by the California Land Commission after the Mexican-American War. Ruiz de Burton was barely into her teens during the height of the Mexican-American War. When American troops, the New York Volunteers, marched into La Paz, there was only minor resistance. Most La Paz citizens, upset at Mexico's neglect of its northern territories, welcomed the Americans. In fact, they hoped that La Paz would become part of the United States once the war was over. One of the American officers was Lieutenant Colonel Henry Stanton Burton. Burton was from a prominent New England family and was a West Point graduate. His father, Oliver G. Burton, had also attended and graduated from West Point. These similarities set the stage for a favorable meeting. They both had been raised in military-educated families, and both were children of privilege. Maria's education was not the conventional schooling that American public or private educational institutions offered at that time. However, her writings reveal a woman who read widely and with acumen. Her letter writing, which spans her youthful musings, adult observations, and middle-age concern, draws readers into a richly intellectual private world. So she has this really privileged background, and then when she marries Burton, then the United States broadens its territory, and then all of a sudden she goes from being very privileged to then second class as a Mexican. So very important what happens to her throughout her lifetime. After her husband dies of malaria after the Civil War, then what she didn't know was her husband had a number of debts. So after that, she is constantly resisting debtors who are after her, and at the same time trying to preserve her lands that the California Land Commission are trying to take away. She ends up dying penniless in Chicago, so she's familiar with this area as well. There are two men who helped her, especially after her husband died, and these two men figured prominently in her life. The first was Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, a prominent Californio, and you've probably heard of the city of Vallejo in Northern California. That is named after him. Vallejo was active in Northern California politics and society. He served in the Diputación, or Congress, in the early 1830s and was commander of the Presidio of San Francisco from 1831 to 1834. He also founded Sonoma in 1835. Ruiz de Burton was about 24 years younger than Vallejo, but despite their age difference, they enjoyed almost 40 years of letter writing. She considered Vallejo her best friend and confidant next to her husband. After Burton died, her friendship with Vallejo strengthened. Vallejo became her Western link to her Mexican cultural and political identity. The second man in her life was Samuel Latham Mitchell Barlow, a prominent lawyer in New York from 1849 to 1889. He would also figure prominently. She turned to Barlow for legal and business advice. Barlow served as her support and intellectual liaison to the literary world. He had connections to publishing houses such as Lippincott and to the press. In Who Would Have Thought It, the character of Mr. Norval reflects Barlow's politics and criticisms of abolitionists. So very important also to her. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to some of her letters, first of all, that tell us a little bit about who she is. So here she is in Washington, D.C. She's there with her husband, and she's writing to Vallejo. And she says, I remember well all of you, and I have remembered since I left California, particularly last winter in Washington. And this is written on June 23rd of 1860. I would have wanted you to be here. I went to various presidential receptions with Mrs. Lincoln, some of the senators' wives, and members of the cabinet. I also went to the Capitol to hear the speeches of Mr. Davis, Hughes, Sumner, Hammond, etc., etc. I cannot say that their eloquence made me imagine that I was listening to Demosthenes when Philip was threatening Athens. Not a bit of it. But since I had my opera glasses with me, I amused myself watching the audience in the galleries. Today, Washington is very lonely. They write me from there because Congress is presently adjourned. It is almost a month since I left there. I stopped for 2 weeks in New York, and it has been about 2 weeks that I am here and will stay until my husband returns from California. And I'm sorry when she says when I'm here. She's in Norwich, Vermont, writing this letter. So she says of Vermont, she says, this small town is very beautiful in the summer. It is surrounded by trees that line the Connecticut River, which, at its margin, I often sit in the afternoons to daydream. I notice that I am in love with the river, and if it were mythological times, there is no doubt that the god of Connecticut would respond to my sighs. But those happy times have now passed when one would grab the gods by the hair. In this era of railroads and magnetic telegraphs, there is no hope of transforming into a nymph, except to simply fall in love with rivers. It may be easier to transform into a frog, I think, and disappear into a Frenchman's teeth. So, very interesting personality she has. Also, she talks about the Yankee nation. It is such a systematic, tolerated, and supported Yankee nation humbug that even they almost believe it. There is much to see in the U.S. and much to think about, particularly if one begins to make comparisons. In reality, to truly appreciate one thing, it is necessary to look well at the other. I I think the best I can do is to write a book. What do you think? Would you read it? Would you like me to make you one of my heroes? The scene should be set in California. The content and the differences of the two races is a grand theme. If you don't want me to put you in my book, tell me in advance. Or if not, there you will see yourself well turned out in a prominent place when you least expect. Then in her desperate moments, she writes, and this is again to Vallejo in 1869, and this is after her husband has died, and all those debtors are after her. She says, if my strength fails me, then I ask you in advance not to severely judge me. Remember that I am a woman and Mexican, with my soul enclosed in an iron cage. In this manner, society confines us as soon as we are born, like the Chinese and the feet of their women. And then finally, in this section, she's writing to Mr. Barlow about this book, Who Would Have Thought It? And she says, I explained to Mr. Lippincott that I wished 4 copies of my book, and this is in 1872. She's writing actually from San Francisco to Mr. Barlow. I explained to Mr. Lippincott that I wished 4 copies of my book to be sent to you and that you would send them to the World, the Herald, the Times, and the Tribune. Now I receive a letter from Mr. Walter Lippincott saying that the books were not sent to those 4 newspapers. I am truly disappointed and vexed at this. What shall I do? Is it too late for you to make good your kind promise? I think not. I will write today to Mr. Lippincott telling him to send you a copy, and then you must really do all you can for me. I do hope you will read it yourself for my sake. I would like so much to know what you think of it. You must tell me. The title of it is, Who Would Have Thought It? I hope you will give me all the benefit of your influence with the New York press, for I would like to make the venture a little bit profitable. I did not write for glory. And then I'm going to give you a little paragraph of this chapter where it gives you a flavor of her satirical style. And this is very much a satire in the Stowe tradition. Also, I would not only say in the Stowe tradition, and what I'm thinking of is her book, Old Town Folks, in that tradition, but also Dickens. I think of Dickens and his American Notes for General Circulation, and I also think of Francis Trollope's 1832 book, The Domestic Manners of the Americans, where they really satirized American culture and society. So in this paragraph, she says, it was the anniversary of some great day in New England when the Misses Norval were to make their farewell appearance in church before leaving for Europe. Some great day in which the Pilgrim Fathers had done some one of their wonderful deeds. They had either embarked, or landed, or burnt a witch, or whipped a woman at the pillory on just such a day. The reverend gentlemen of our acquaintance were to hold forth to their respective congregations who idolized them, and would have mobbed and lynched anyone daring to hint that the 2 divines solaced themselves with a jug of whiskey after those edifying sermons, that it was John Barleycorn and not John the Baptist. Mr. Hackwell said he liked to consult after the church. They did not know how many puns the witty Hackwell had made on Demi-John and St. John and Jolly John, which last was himself. And I'm going to finish with a footnote I wrote. I'm going to finish this part with a footnote I wrote concerning this dog that Ruiz de Burton uses throughout the book. The dog's name is Jack Sprigg. And when you write footnotes, when you go through a book and read, think, okay, what would be a good footnote? This one, Jack Sprigg, I kept going over, why would she call the dog Jack Sprigg? What's the deal? And so this is my footnote. Jack Sprigg. The little dog's name and behavior bring to mind a character from 1800s British folklore, Spring-Heeled Jack. Ruiz de Burton may have known about Spring-Heeled Jack, who was believed to be the Marquis of Waterford, an Irish nobleman known for his pranks and misogyny. The 1840 play Spring-Heeled Jack, The Terror of London, written by Thomas Haynes, quickly entered the British and American popular imagination. Jack has remained a popular figure. From Spring-Heeled Jack, Stephen King invokes Jack in his short story Strawberry Spring. Then a British jazz band formed in the 1990s called themselves Spring-Heeled Jack. And then Jackie Chan includes Jack in one of his animated adventures. So you see how footnotes are important in the sense of connecting, how we use these famous theater pieces, art, or literature or music throughout the centuries. And now that brings us to the contemporary period. And I'm going to transition into this piece that is, sections of this piece are further developed in my memoir. And this is called Queen for a Day. My mother is about to appear on the show Queen for a Day. I'm sure of it. The screen footage is grainy and black. Sometimes the images lighten and disappear, an accidental chiaroscuro effect. There are 4 women on a stage, sitting at a table. I leave my chair and kneel in front of the TV to get a close-up view. 3 of the women are heavy-set, their arms stiff on the table's surface, hands uniformly clasped together. The 4th woman, slim and small, hides her hands under the table. The modest sweetheart necklines, high collars, and prominent dart stitching on their blouses marks them as differently classed from the 4 shapely women who are standing behind them in glittery halter tops and tiny dark skirts. The 4 sitting women do not smile. They look very serious and out of place next to the animated women behind them who are smiling and positioning their graceful arms toward the table. Their pose encourages my gaze to curve round them and end up at the table of these 4 stern-looking women. Suddenly, the camera pans across the stage to a man in a dark suit. He quickly raises both arms and points to the audience. The camera moves past the stage to a large theater. I hear the host, Jack Bailey, yell, "Would you like to be Queen for a Day?" I freeze the frame and notice that the audience is mostly female. They look very much like the women sitting at the table on the stage, serious and modestly dressed. I'm straining my eyes, trying to recognize my mother in the crowd. I don't see anyone with my mother's thick eyebrows, arched nose, full lips. I see women dressed like my mother and like the ones on stage, nondescript A-line dresses, button-down blouses, 3/4 sleeves. This is a crowd of women who look like they've been plucked off the street on their way to work or the grocery store. Most have short hairstyles with back or side sweeps of curls or hair flipped up at the ends. Most are Anglo, or they look Anglo to me, light hair, white faces. I do not see anyone who has my cousin Ricardo's kinky black hair and brown skin, or Tia Chala's dark freckled face and reddish hair. Even with the black and white screen, I can see that the audience is mainly white. However, after watching one show, it's clear to me that audience members are not upper or middle class. These are working class women who tell working class stories. They may not look like my family, but we're working class like them. This show is one of the earliest versions of what will become 21st century reality television. Based in Los Angeles, the Queen for a Day audience and contestants were local. No one was flown in. Instead, any woman in Los Angeles had a chance to become queen for a day if they had the day off and a ride to the Moulin Rouge Theater in Hollywood. Once they became audience members, they were invited to write down their sob stories and what they would desire if chosen queen, all on individual 3x5 index cards. They did this before being treated to a nice buffet meal. While they ate, a group of judges backstage read their cards and chose the contestants for each segment of the show that was to tape that day. Audience participation was crucial, not only before but during the show. The audience became the judge by applauding the most tragic story. During the applause, viewers at home could see the applause meter measuring the sound. The chosen queen would win by having the loudest applause noted on the meter. Single mothers, widows, victims of fires, floods, disease, they're all here in front of me, ready to tell everyone their stories. They tell the announcer they're from La Cañada, Whittier, Pasadena, Bakersfield. Years later, Jerry Springer takes this to a whole other level, and after that, an explosion of other shows emerge: Extreme Makeover, The Biggest Loser, sob stories on talk shows with host Tyra Banks and Oprah Winfrey. I carefully placed 3 photographs of my mother on the little shelf next to the television. Someone wrote on the back of each photograph, Emma, 1958. In one photograph, she stands outside the apartment building holding me in her arms. She wears an apron over a tent dress, or shift, as she used to call it. In the other 2, she's standing next to a bus stop on a downtown street. She looks shapelier here in a pencil skirt and tucked-in blouse she told me she had sewn herself. In all 3, she has short cropped black hair. In 1958, my mother has been in the United States for a little over 10 years. Since arriving from Mexico with her mother and brother, she has been working in drugstore-type jobs, selling cosmetics and camera film. The women she works with are a mix of Mexican, Salvadoran, and also Jewish immigrants from New York who teach her English, sprinkled with a little Yiddish. To this day, she speaks English with a heavy accent that at times I call Latin American New York. When I was little, I met her friends from the drugstore. One of them was Mary. I first saw her at our house. She had recently changed her name from Maria to Mary, and my mother kept making the mistake of calling her Maria and getting scolded for it. Mary wore flowery print dresses that were belted at the waist. Her hair was teased out on the sides and dyed blonde, yet her brown roots were noticeable, like a halo around her forehead. She was loud and talked fast while expertly balancing a cigarette on her skinny lower lip. She frequently gave my mother instructions on what to do, where to buy clothes, find grocery bargains. I never saw her with family, only now and again with a different man. The men seemed to be the same type, heavy smokers like her, loud and bossy. Later, when I was older, my mother told me in hushed tones that Mary had died. Mary was an alcoholic, she whispered, as she did with any kind of scandalous story. Everybody knew. Maybe this is why my mother often lied about her past. Maybe she didn't like thinking there were whispers about her, about us. She also had tragic stories that, for years, I did not know about. She was adept at creating a fictional story about her marriage, her home life, the lies. That she had married only once, that her family descended from upper-class Spaniards, that she had laughed more than cried in her life. The truth. Her first marriage was to a man who was married to 3 other women. He had met her at the drugstore cosmetic counter and wooed her every Thursday and Friday afternoon. He even escorted his mother to meet hers. There was a formal marriage proposal to my mother's brother and mother. There was a formal wedding at La Placita in downtown Los Angeles with a white dress and chambelanes y madrinas, mainly friends who worked at her drugstore, his sisters, and my mother's brother. Small but sweet. The wedding night was an assault and a rape, and this continued for a number of weeks. He raped her, hit her, and then disappeared for days at a time. At one point, my mother went to the priest to ask if this was really what marriage was about, only to be told that she must be doing something wrong. She needed to return and be a better wife. After another 2 weeks of beatings, my uncle rescued her and took her back to the priest to ask about an annulment. The priest needed proof she was not pregnant. The test indicated she was, and the priest refused to dissolve the marriage. The day after the priest refused, my mother called her husband's mother to tell her all that had occurred. "Ay, mujer," his mother replied. "Your husband is married to 3 other women and already has 3 children." ¿Qué? Here I imagine my mom on the phone, tears welling up in her eyes. Horrific news. All she wanted to do was get married and start a family. "I thought you could change him," his mother had said. A year later, my mother was still married in the eyes of the church. Her brother had helped her obtain a divorce in civil court, but in reality, she was a divorced single mother working in a drugstore. I was 25 years old when my mother first told me these details. She needed me to type answers to questions on Catholic annulment request forms. She had done nothing about requesting another annulment after finding out she had married a bigamist. Instead, when she met my biological father 5 years after leaving the bigamist, she bypassed the church and married him in a nondescript wedding chapel in Tecate, Mexico. The next week, they repeated their vows in the Los Angeles downtown office near the Placita Church. It wasn't until 15 years after my biological father died that she again attempted to annul the first marriage in order to formally marry Jose, the third man in her life. She was determined to marry him in the Catholic Church, and this time she had me to type the forms and make our case. During the process, I had to stop and cry at various moments while I typed the horrific story of wife battering and betrayal, but at times I found some levity. "So you never married my biological father in the church, Mom?" "No, I couldn't." "Bueno," I answered with a chuckle. "Then in the church's eyes, I'm really the bastard child." "Ay, hija, no digas." No digas is my mother's favorite line. Always adamant about teaching her daughters to follow her example. On the worst day of your life, she says, you put on your makeup, your best dress, and you walk out the door with a smile on your face. No digas. Don't tell anyone the truth. What's really happening? You want to put your best face out in the public. Always tell people you are having a good day. I think about the many times I could intuitively sense that behind that smile and those happy words, something was not right with my mother. The truth always has a way of slipping itself through cracks in the narrative. I unfreeze the frame and fast forward to the next Queen for a Day installment. She does not appear on the screen here either. I feel disappointment, but remind myself there are other shows to see. If she's not here, she may appear in another. Over and over again, I see Jack Bailey turn to the audience with a loud, gruff voice and say, "Would you like to be Queen for a Day?" "Yes," the audience shouts back. I fast forward, hoping she'll be on the next episode. My mother first told me she had appeared on the 1950s TV show Queen for a Day when I was in college. I was attending Loyola Marymount University as a scholarship student. At Loyola, you either came from wealth or you came from poverty. I was there on a full scholarship, a full-on poverty case because my biological father had killed himself my junior year in high school and there was hardly any other income. The year before he died, he had suffered a stroke and spent months trying to recover from his paralysis. At first he was optimistic, but soon he gave up. For my mother, his suicide was the ultimate in public embarrassment. She went to great lengths to try to change what was written on the death certificate, but to no avail. The priest, her friends at work, her best friend Veronica kept pressing her to go to a therapist. She finally did, but only once. Her one and only experience was baffling to her. Why ask me about my childhood when my husband has died? What does that have to do with it? No, I have my rosary and my prayers. That's all I need. In suicide cases, especially at that time, families could be deprived of life insurance or other benefits, and my mother's only job at the time was as a part-time teacher's aide in a nearby public high school. During my college years, she kept her teacher's aide job while also working in department stores. My sister Rosa, from my mother's first marriage, helped as much as she could. She was, like my mom had been, a divorced single mom. She had managed to go to a junior college, receive a degree in respiratory therapy, and find employment in a nearby hospital. Rosa stayed close to home. I was far away in a very different world of privileged college students living in dorms that overlooked the Pacific Ocean and the Marina del Rey Yacht Club. At Loyola, I learned quickly, after a few faux pas, that lying, like my mother had modeled, was not such a bad idea. One day I asked a classmate who was majoring in television communications where I could find footage of Queen for a Day to see if I could locate my mother. I seriously believed my mother's brief television appearance could make me look pretty good. The classmate, a young woman who traveled to Paris in the summers to study French, looked aghast. "Your mother was on Queen for a Day?" I smiled proudly. Yes, she was. Wow, how pathetic. My face immediately went hot. I felt like Dick Gregory when he wrote, "I never learned hate at home or shame. I had to go to school for that." I didn't bring it up again to anyone until I was an assistant professor many years later. A friend I trusted who was in television writing and producing suggested I contact the Museum of Television and Radio or the UCLA Film Archives. I followed his suggestion, but nothing ever came of it. Both organizations informed me that the show was not public domain, meaning I couldn't just come to the archive or museum and see the footage. The manager of research services at the Museum of Television and Radio was the only person who actually sent me an email. Raymond Morgan Jr., the son of the show's original producer, had the copyright for Queen for a Day, and he was not allowing footage for public use. I dropped the search. Then last year, my mother mentioned the show again, remarking how Jack Bailey had a little thin mustache and a loud voice. He was so self-assured, she said. He also stood very close to her when he asked his questions. "He was flirting with you," I said. "Pendejo." "No," she smiled. "He was like Don Francisco, el del Sábado Gigante show on Univision. Just being very friendly, you know, helping us tell our stories." "But Mom," I said, "it's embarrassing. These shows just love trotting out people's personal tragic stories. It's all so melodramatic." Mom looked at me carefully. "I like hearing the stories. It's about our lives." This time I felt a reversal of shame, like I was telling my mother, pathetic, the way that classmate used the word against me. Jumping class lines does that. You leave your working class home to go to a good college, to get an MA, a PhD, which is a good thing, but you also lose. I emailed my producer friend again and told him of my sketchy attempts at tracking down the show. To my surprise, a reply email quickly arrived. "Wow, found Queen for a Day. It's available on Amazon.com. Wow was right, I thought, and immediately keyed in the website on my computer. A vintage picture of the show came up on the screen, and the ad read, "The 50s were the golden era of television's game and quiz shows. 5 days a week, the voice of Jack Bailey, Master of Ceremonies, carried across the national television via NBC, ABC, and the Mutual Broadcasting System. 10 million viewers settled in to see another Cinderella's wish come true. Now I'm here in front of the television. I'm worried that my mother will not appear, even though I have read that it only contains 7 complete episodes and fragments of rare rescued footage. I still want to believe that in the next show or the next, I will be watching my mom on the screen. I continue to freeze frame various sections to peruse the audience or to study Jack Bailey's behavior and body language. He really does lean in close to each contestant, especially the young women. At one point, he tells a contestant how nice she smells. I also pay attention to the commercials and gifts the contestants receive: a Hoover vacuum cleaner, a Westinghouse refrigerator or washer dryer. A tall, lanky man in a black suit appears on the very right corner of the stage. He holds a cigarette in his hand, takes a puff, then directs the camera to the table in front of him. Boxes of cigarette packs are displayed. Today, every contestant will receive a 6-pack of Old Gold cigarettes. Remember, Old Gold is the smoothest cigarette. Instant pleasure from the first puff to the last. And he takes another drag of his cigarette, exhales, and smiles. It all looks very practiced. Halfway through the entire DVD, I am miserable. "Mom, where are you?" I say out loud as the next 4 female contestants are escorted to the stage. All I want is one program with my mother in it, so I can see how close Jack Bailey stood next to her, so I can hear what she sounded like, so I can see and hear her story. Could she have said the truth about her first marriage? No way. If she did, everything she taught me about keeping life's difficulties private would be null and void. As I fiddle with the TV monitor, I keep thinking that if she were on the show a few months after my birth, she'd still be in her 20s, young enough to innocently say the truth, what she'd been through, what she desired if chosen queen. Did she realize 10 million people were watching? Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll see her footage and understand that my mother was quite a different individual from what I know of her now. People change. Maybe she was as desperate to tell her story as some of these other women seem to be in order to get something significant in return. Who knows? Maybe at that age she would have gone to see a therapist. I keep thinking about age and events that shape and change a person's attitude, personality, outlook. Maybe this is why I want to see my mother. I want to know all of her during every stage of life. How did she become who she is now? Not only do I want to see her face, hear the sound of her voice, I am bracing myself to see if she will appear as dark and dire as most of the women appear. Show after show, the candidates tell their sorry stories and ask for some kind of material object to make their life or the life of their loved ones or friends better. I sit and listen to women who have suffered innumerable losses. The death of a husband or the death of a mother or father. A woman retells how her children died in a fire. She had saved one, but the firemen did not let her go back in to save the others. One woman's husband left her and asked for money to get an education so she can get a job. Another woman works in a factory, candling eggs on the outskirts of Los Angeles. She asks for more comfortable seats for her and her fellow workers and better lighting so they can more clearly see the inside of the eggs. Occasionally, there are younger contestants. A 15-year-old is living with her mother. She is pregnant and in need of clothing for the baby. During that segment, the young girl hardly looks into the camera. By the end of 2 hours, I am depressed. I stop the show and look up reviews of the show on the computer. There are many. I notice that even Wikipedia has an entry for the show, describing it as, quote, an inverted Horatio Alger story. Instead of the individual making good, the lure of Queen for a Day is woman making rock bottom, or close enough to it. The tear-jerking factor seems to be the appeal here in order to be crowned queen for one day in her life. The harsher the circumstances that lead a contestant to the stage, the likelier the studio audience will be to ring the applause meter's highest level. I turn off the television and dial my mother's cell phone number. No answer. My mother has gone on a driving trip with my sister and brother-in-law. They are in Las Vegas for 2 days. Las Vegas. Never in my childhood do I remember my mother having spent time in Las Vegas. My father was the one who gambled, and there had been many fights in the house about gambling. My mother complained that she didn't have enough money to buy us socks and shoes because he was spending it at Santa Anita Park betting on the horses. This was true. I blamed the disappearance of my roller skating doll on gambling. Every December, I would unwrap used Christmas paper taped over again on the same box. I'd carefully open the box, and there would be a 2-foot-tall doll with roller skates strapped to her little feet. After unbuttoning her dress and inserting batteries inside her upper back, I flipped the little switch a few inches below her neck. She roller skated across the living room, down the hallway, on the cement pavement outside. By the evening, when I tired of playing with her, she would suddenly disappear. My mother wanted to ensure that the following Christmas I'd have a doll. And I did, whether or not my father spent money. It was just the same doll every year. I just couldn't have her for good. She needed to stay fresh and new. Perhaps my mother caused him to feel guilt regarding gambling. Maybe this is why he included me in his vice, to show that he was still a good father by taking me to the races or teaching me other gambling games. Either that, or I was simply the son he never had, a son he could introduce to gambling. He taught me how to play poker and 7-card stud, and he also took me to the horse races. We visited Hollywood Park in Inglewood as often as we attended Mass. I remember standing on the hard and cold outdoor seats in order to see the track below because the cigar and cigarette-smoking men all around me were either much too tall or wide for a 6-year-old to see beyond. What I remember most is that it would take forever for the horses to enter the gate. I didn't mind the parade of horses in the beginning. There's my number 7, I'd tell my dad excitedly. But then there was the wait of situating them within the gate, getting everything just right for a 2 to 3 minute race around the track. After 2 races, I was bored. Often I'd watch the crowd. There were men who looked angry and mean, others concerned. One I saw crying in a corner one day after I came out of the public bathroom. He was wearing a torn shirt and looked crumpled up against the wall. My dad taught me at a young age that gambling was a very boring business that could also be dangerous. And since I became involved with it at such a young age, I never wanted to do it as an adult. Now in her 80s, my mother is somewhere, I imagine, staring at brightly colored cherries, apples, and oranges in a row and hearing bells and jangling machine sounds. I see the curling tendrils of cigarette smoke around her. I dial her number again. Hello? Mom? Yes, are you okay? Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. My imagining her at a slot machine was no guess. I can hear the pings and electronic melodies quite clearly in the background. Are you winning some money? She is laughing. No, mijita, I'm running out of pennies. I need to stop. I feel frustrated. I want to talk with her about Queen for a Day, but she's gambling. A month later, I am sitting with my mother. It's spring break, and I've come to interview her for a memoir I'm writing. I show her the pictures I have of when she is young in the pencil skirt and the tucked-in blouse. She cries when she sees them and tells me she can't believe she is the woman in the picture. Where have the years gone, she sighs. I also take out the Queen for a Day DVD and begin playing it. She smiles and laughs through the shows. She takes my hand and says, I went with your grandmother Mariquita and your tia Concha. Your other grandmother Juanita was taking care of you. You were only about 2 months old. I know the show was very popular, I say. I'm noticing the differences between the pictures I've placed on her lap and the way she looks now. Much smaller than the woman in the pictures. Frail. Her smile is the same, but there are creases around the lips, under her eyes, and liver spots on her neck. Her hair is dyed blonde like Mary's used to be. I don't like it, but I don't press that issue now. We've let go of a number of differences. She now respects me for being lesbian and embraces my partner. I respect her choice of hair color. So why did you decide to go to Queen for a Day? We went because they gave you a nice free meal. A few weeks before we went, I sewed up some nice clothes for me and your grandmother and aunt to wear, and we went. Oh, the buffet was delicious. And then while all of us ate, they gave us a card to write down what we would want if we were chosen queen. And I wrote down that I wanted a record player and English language instructional record so your grandmother Juanita could learn English. Well, that's not such a sob story. So they called you up to the stage, and what did you tell Jack Bailey? My mom looks very intent. Well, he really came close to me and asked me my nationality. I told him I was French. Why did you say you were French? She laughs. Well, I've told you I didn't speak very good English at that time, and people would try to guess where I came from, and more than once, people would ask if I was French. After so many times, I would just say yes. Oh, Mom, why didn't you tell the truth? She smiles. Oh, mija, we were having a good time, and the food was so good. Mom, I'm exasperated. Some of those stories are so sad. Yes, she says in a matter-of-fact tone, and some of the stories, you know, were made up. I'm sure of it. But in our group, the woman who won couldn't have been lying. She had a wooden leg. When we saw her wooden leg, we knew she was going to win. What did she ask for? A new leg. I turned to the television. The applause meter hits its highest number. The somber-looking woman in the tent dress is being ushered over to Jack Bailey, who envelops her in a bulky velvet robe. The crown he places on her head slips to one side. She looks like a very angry queen. The camera pans to the audience. Women are clapping, standing, smiling. The queen sits on her throne. I wonder if she is still alive. Does she have a daughter, and has she seen this footage? Thank you.